Okay, so in terms of problem-based learning, or PBL, as you'll often see me kind of shorten it as we go through today's presentation, I'm aware that a lot of people use it within their teaching throughout semester 1 and semester 2, or terms if you're teaching in that respect. But I just wanted, in case anybody wasn't familiar with the terminology, just to introduce that at the start of today's session. So problem-based learning, with the idea really is you give the students a problem, as the name suggests, and they use their knowledge that they've gained throughout the teaching so far and apply it to that particular problem in order to resolve it in the best way possible. And so this is really well used within science, and particularly medicine. So, for example, if you have a patient present themselves at A&E and they have a particular issue, then obviously the doctors, nurses, medical practitioners, etc., need to try and apply their knowledge and work out the best way to deal with a particular patient. So it's great to have problem-based learning within universities in order for them to gain those skills before they actually go out and work in the real world in those situations. And so we can apply that kind of idea, if you like, to so many different fields. And the idea really with problem-based learning is it needs to be aligned with what they're actually learning at the time, and it needs to be as authentic as possible. Because there's no point providing them with scenarios that are hypothetical and they're never going to come across, because the students aren't going to engage in it. And again, if it's not directly linked to their learning, then again, student engagement is going to be quite limited. So I've used quite a lot of problem-based learning, and as you can probably tell from this presentation, I'm really, really excited about problem-based learning and like to use it quite a lot. I personally am very much a hands-on doing type of learner, and I know a lot of students are in a very similar position. So I like to incorporate it whenever I can, because I think the students get so much out of the experience. So I've used it quite a lot in the past in other modules that I've taught at a previous institution. So, for example, we used to do a crime scene to court type module, and I'm sure that many of you in the room today, or the virtual room today at least, have used a similar sort of thing within your teaching as well. In the past, I've taught sort of modules that are primarily based all around one case, where students work their way through from crime scene all the way through the sort of analytical side of things to court. And I've also used it in sort of standalone sessions. So my personal background is I was a CSI before I became an academic, and therefore I taught a lot of crime scene type modules. And so I would try to teach the students obviously how to do certain recovery techniques, so how to swab for biological fluids, how to recover fingerprint evidence, etc., and then allow them a scenario where they can then apply those skills to try and resolve the issue in hand. So previously I worked within the School of Life Sciences looking at forensic science at Anglia Ruskin University, but a couple of years ago I moved to the University of Leicester, and I'm now situated within the School of Criminology. So I've kind of jumped institutions, but also almost kind of fields, if you like. So I've gone from a kind of science field to more of a social science field now. And what was quite surprising to me, I was expecting there to be a difference between institutions, if you like, and I've been at ARU for over a decade, so I was a little bit institutionalised to a certain extent there anyway. But I didn't realise there was going to be so much of a difference between teaching methodologies within sciences and social sciences. And obviously, I'm well aware that there would be a limited kind of practical hands-on approach, but a lot of the teaching methodologies and methods of assessment are very, very different between the two fields. And so what I was kind of shocked to see was that there was a real lack of problem-based learning within criminology and criminal justice. And this is something that I wanted to incorporate as part of my teaching. So I was very, very lucky in that last year, my wonderful colleagues at the University of Leicester asked me if I would like to design a new module. And it would be based in policing in order to complement some of the other policing modules that we have, which obviously speaks quite nicely to the background that I have before being an academic. And so we do a lot of teaching of policing stuff at the moment, so kind of introductory stuff in the first year through to more theoretical leadership kind of qualities, etc., within our final year and our master's programmes. So they wanted something to kind of sit in the middle and straddle both of those. But at the moment, well, previously, we didn't have anything to do with the more investigative side of policing. Now, obviously, this is something that I'm really, really keen about, again, due to my background. So this is the kind of idea that I had in order to take this further forward and create this new module. So it's a second year module and it's worth 15 credits. And it's available not only to criminology students, but also law students at the university as well. So anyone can choose this module on those two programmes. And so what I thought to do to start with is I would think about all of the kind of previous problem-based learning that I'd done when I worked for Anglia Ruskin University. And a lot of it was hands-on, but I also created a module when I was at the university, which looked at more of a paper-based tabletop exercise in problem-based learning. But it was very much with a forensic slant. So I thought perhaps I could then use that kind of idea and those methodologies, but apply it more to a criminal investigation side and just sort of change the main focus, if you like, of the module. So in addition to that, I then tried to incorporate as many ideas from lots of practitioners as I could. So I got in contact with our local police force, some of the detectives, etc., that work quite closely with us within the School of Criminology, and asked for their input into the module as well. And so what we decided to do was base the whole module on the one case. And now the case is a suspicious death in order to make sure that we cover it throughout the whole semester. And the long and short of it is a sort of elderly lady has been found deceased in her house, along with a few random items that don't necessarily correspond to the elderly lady. So, for example, there's an iPhone, and we know the elderly lady didn't have an iPhone. So that's kind of raised some suspicions. And so all of the students start at exactly the same space. So they're all given a crime scene video of what's gone on. They're given some crime scene photographs, and they're also given statements from the first attending officers, and also the paramedic who pronounced the elderly lady deceased, and also the neighbour that found her. So they're all starting at the same kind of position, but the idea then throughout the semester is each group would work independently to actually learn lots and lots of different techniques, apply it to their case, so they would all go off almost in slightly different directions. So the nearest thing I can kind of put it to is, I don't know if anybody read books when they were younger. I used to have like the 5 go walking, etc., and the famous 5, and it'd be turn to page number 2 if you want to go over the bridge and talk to somebody in the village, and turn to page 8 if you wanted to go in a different direction. And it's a similar sort of thing, so the students get to choose exactly what decisions they want to make, and their investigation will go off in that direction. And so the way I've structured the module is as follows. So because these are second years, they know a little bit about policing, but it's very, very basic. So they know who police officers are, they know what their roles are, and they know the difference between police officers and police support staff and so on and so forth. But they don't really know much about investigations. So I wanted to start right at the bottom. So to start with, we look at some of the personnel involved within investigations. So who are investigators, the fact that we have detectives, but we also now have more civilian investigators coming along. And the fact that forensics play a really large part of the investigative process, but there are also different support units that may be involved within criminal investigations. So we may need a search team, for example, to help us. We may need a firearms team or a search dog or something along those lines. And so we talk about that at the beginning. And then in the second week, we look at various investigative models. So how can we go about it? Do we want to use like the golden hour approach, where we sort of jump straight in and try and do as much as we can? And so what happens then from the week 3 onwards is we look at a specific element, if you like, of an investigation, and the students then focus on that particular element within their own investigation as well. So we cover forensic science, house to house, media strategies, how to deal with witnesses, how to deal with intelligence, what happens when you want to arrest somebody, and if you arrest somebody, can you then search their premises, what powers do you need, how do you interview them, and then how do you combine all of this together to create a case file for the CPS. And then at the end of that, we all have our presentations. So each week the students work in a group to come up with a strategy of how they want to approach their investigation, and then they have to apply that strategy to their actual investigation. So the way that the module is assessed is we have in the final week group presentations. So each group presents how they got from the start to the end of their investigation, and it's really nice because you get to see all the students go, oh, we didn't do that, oh, we should have maybe took that path, and we didn't decide to do that. So it's really interesting to see how they've all gone about it in a very different way, and sometimes come up with similar things and sometimes not. But the main bulk of the assessment is actually the writing of the strategies. So they're allowed to choose 2 out of all of the strategies that they work on each week to write up individually, and obviously make sure that it's fully supported with academic references and so on and so forth. So the way that the module is sort of structured is we have our weekly taught lecture. So this is where I deliver the information to the students that they need to give them a basic understanding of the elements that we're focusing on. And then after that, we have a lot of weekly online activities for the students to do. So it includes a reading generally, but also other activities, which could be watching a documentary, or we sometimes ask them to do more creative things like create a poster or a leaflet or so on and so forth. And all that is kind of, again, enhancing and developing their learning of the topic. And then we go into our weekly problem-based learning workshop, where they work as a group throughout the whole of the semester with the same group of people, and they're basically acting as the senior investigating officers in the case. So what they do then is they apply their knowledge to create this sort of investigative strategy, which they then apply to their case. And so they have an idea of how they want to approach it. And what they then need to do is write a list of all the different actions, so tasks, if you like, that they want to be done. So they, at the end of the session, they'll give me that list. And then what happens after that is they have a little bit of preparation in readiness for the following week's one. So they get to read all of the results that they get from their actions, and they also set themselves a homework task. So, for example, in the forensic week, we'll often say, well, we've got this pathology report back from the post-mortem, and I have no idea what all of these terms mean. So what they'll do is they'll divide it up and they'll say, OK, you take this section, go away and actually research what all these terms mean. So when we get together next week, we'll all have an understanding of what it is. And so each member of the group will set themselves a little task to do over the week, which will then further support and encourage members of their team to kind of further progress their investigation. And also I was concerned at the start of this that we wouldn't necessarily have enough time, because we only have a 2-hour workshop, whether we could squeeze all of this in. So I did make sure that we use Blackboard. So on Blackboard, there is an area where they can then meet if they want to in their own time. To be honest, not many people like using Blackboard, so most of the time they use WhatsApp or whatever, but they have the opportunity then to get together outside of the classroom. So the module itself is structured quite well. However, there is a bit of a flaw, which again is something I've done to myself. So overall, we have 10 hours per week of guided material that we give to the students, and we do this across all modules within the School of Criminology. So there's quite a lot there for the students to do, but it's broken down into 5 hours of essential work and then 5 hours of recommended work. So the essential work is you need to do this to pass the module, and then the recommended is how to enhance and further develop their knowledge. But the issue with this, which I didn't quite anticipate at the time, is from the workshop, in order to make sure the students have enough time to prepare for the following week's workshop, I need to get their list of actions and basically create all their results within 24 hours. So I usually spend an evening a week basically sitting at my computer creating all sorts of things for the students to read, and I'll give you an indication of that in a moment. So I thought I'd give you an average week of what this would actually look like on paper. So I picked week 4, where we look at house-to-house inquiries. So the lecture itself is fairly basic, standard stuff. So we look at what is house-to-house, why is house-to-house important, who are the personnel that might be involved in it. So what's the pros and cons of maybe having neighbourhood officers versus major crime unit actually doing the house-to-house inquiries. So they gain those kind of critical skills, and they learn about some of the issues as we go through the lectures. We also talk about some of the parameters. So you don't want to knock on everybody's door in the whole city. You need to actually narrow down your parameters about who you're going to target in terms of house-to-house inquiries. What kind of tools might you want to use? And so we look at some of those within the lecture. Then that week they have a reading to do, which is again based on house-to-house inquiries, and they also need to make sure they've read obviously last week's workshop stuff. And then the supporting activities that week is they have a reflection looking at some of the key themes, where we pull them out, if you like, of the lecture to make sure they're understanding some of the really important bits. And then I did a creative thing that week where they could design a house-to-house leaflet. So if anybody theoretically wasn't in when they arrived to do their house-to-house inquiries, we could post this leaflet through the door so that they had information about what had gone on, but also contact details then to get straight through to the major incident room. So some of the students then decided to actually do the leaflet, which was absolutely fabulous to see. But in the workshop, we discussed then the results of last week's to make sure that everybody understands exactly what information has been provided. They can then think, oh, you know, we've managed to get this DNA hit from something. However, you know, all the fingerprints, you know, came back and it wasn't who we thought it might be. So there are some highs and some lows, and you can see the students getting really excited and then really sort of quite upset with the not getting the results that they were hoping for. But what they need to then think is, okay, where does this lead our investigation now? So then they would then think about the topic of this week, so house-to-house inquiries, and then decide on their strategy of how they want to approach it. So they make sort of notes as they go through, contemporaneous notes, and create then a list of actions as well as setting the homework that they would like to do. So when they come into the room every week, I make sure that they're logging in all of the information that they've received over the week. So I wanted to try and make this again as authentic as I possibly could, but obviously a lot of paperwork that the police do is quite in depth and is at a different level to where the students are. So I wanted to give a more basic version of something for the students to work on, so they get the idea without having to worry about too many details of it. So to make sure that they're keeping on top of all of the information coming in, I made sure that they had a disclosure list. So they had to list every piece of information that was coming in, what it told them, when they gained it, and so on and so forth. They also have an exhibits list, which looks very similar to this. So they had to log every exhibit that was coming in and then let us know if it had gone off to the laboratory for analysis, if it had come back, what the results were, and so on and so forth. So on here, you can see that we've got various statements going on, some house-to-house statements, and we've got details about where they came from, who took them, and so on and so forth. I try and include some little amusing names just to keep the students entertained as we go through as well. But what you will notice on the right-hand side, as you go through the further details, is in the final week, we're talking about creating a case file for the CPS, and I tell them that they need to work out whether the information that they're looking at is going to be used as part of their case or whether it's going to be unused material. And so I then send the students back to their disclosure list and exhibits list and so on and so forth to make sure that they're listing whether it's going to be used or unused material, which is why you can see used at the end of a lot of these. So once they're happy that they've logged everything they need to do, I then sort of get excited and tell them that we've got this new team of all these people that are sitting, basically drinking coffee next door, and they're waiting for you to actually task them with whatever you want them to do this week. And so they can still make use of personnel that we've visited in the past, so that's not a problem. It's not just one hit each week. They can actually work their way back as well. But at the end of that week, they need to make sure that they've come up with a list of actions that are very, very clear. Because I will say that if you give this list then to this imaginary team, they need to know exactly what you're asking for. In other words, I need to be able to understand it so I can give them the information that they actually require. So they give me a long list at the end, and I take that away and then spend the evening creating random things that would then fit in with the case study. So this is a kind of example of a list of actions that I received from a group of students last year. And it's a really nice way of being able to see the students' thought processes, but also seeing them incorporate and starting to join up a lot of the investigative elements, but also things from previous modules as well. So here we can see that they've started to pay attention to kind of the role of the different personnel, and they've chosen here to use neighbourhood officers with their house-to-house inquiries. So that to me means that I now have to make sure that any material I create for them have all of the kind of neighbourhood officers, like, if you like, listed as the officers taking part. But we can see that they're using some of the mnemonics from the College of Policing, like the levers model, and they've incorporated the leaflet that they actually created as part of the additional activities and things like that as well. And we can see that they're incorporating information from readings. So they've got a bit about dash cams and CCTV and things like that as well. So it's great to see them bringing all sorts of pieces of information into this. And then at the bottom, they've got a list of questions that they want being asked to house, basically households around the area, but they've listed exactly which houses they want and so on and so forth. So, and it's great at the end, you can see that they're going to upload all of that onto the homes database. So again, showing that kind of flow of information through the module. So at the end, this is one group. So there's generally about 5 people in a group. Last year I had 10 different groups, all asking for completely different things. And this is where logistically it starts getting a little bit more difficult. But to try and make my life a little bit easier, I basically have a repository of fake stuff that I give the students each week. So if a student asks for house-to-house inquiries, generally they ask for the similar sort of things. And so what I do is I basically dig deep into the archives and find the information that they want, and then make sure that I upload it to their group folder. So they're getting the information that they want. If they're asking for something unusual, I'll make sure that that is incorporated in. And if they've not asked for something, then they're getting information for free. So just to give you an example, some students have asked for sort of a DNA examination of an iPhone that's found at the crime scene. And so I click into the forensic labs sort of box, dig deep in there, and then in there I've then created little documents with sort of fake like logos and things like that on there to again make it as authentic as I possibly can, and just keep the information quite basic, because these aren't forensic students, these are criminology students, so we need to make sure that they're understanding exactly what's going on. So we can see here that they've had a look at the phone, no DNA has been recovered, and the phone's been returned back to the police service. So this is one of these that I was obviously delivering this during a pandemic in the middle of lockdown, because it started in January last year, obviously when we went into our second lockdown here in the UK. So I was really concerned about how this was going to take place and how it was going to be received by the students. So all of this was delivered via Blackboard Collaborate, which is really clunky and not particularly great for group working. In addition to that, a lot of students did not want to use their cameras or mics. So I had some groups that were communicating purely via the text function on Blackboard. I had some groups, however, that wanted to use their mics. So we made sure that we grouped people according to their preference. So when the feedback came, I sort of had my head in my hands thinking, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. But I've received some really, really nice sort of feedback from the students about the module, which to be honest made me cry at the time. I was a bit emotional. I think we all were at that point. And so it's really nice to see that the students really embraced it and they got so much from it. And you could see each week they were growing in confidence, in their sort of investigative ability, but also really embrace this kind of new way of learning, because it is so different to anything else that sort of goes on in criminology. And in addition to that, I got my module evaluation survey back as well, which came out as the best one in the whole of School of Criminology last year. So I was really, really pleased. So excited about that. But then I had an email saying we've had a comment from our external examiner about your module, at which point my heart started to sink again. I thought, oh no, I don't know if I can look at this. But she also sort of picked up that it was really innovative and that it was really, really different. And it was really nice to see some of the comments that the external made, sort of seeing, because obviously you only get a snapshot as an external examiner. I know that for myself as being an external examiner, you don't get to see everything that's going on. So it was really nice to see that she could see all of the kind of criticality and analytical skills that the students picked up as they went through the module. So it's not just incorporating the knowledge, but how to apply that knowledge as we go through. So just to kind of summarise all of that, so problem-based learning I think is fabulous and I absolutely love it, and particularly the physical elements, but it really does work well in a tabletop kind of fashion as well. And the students themselves were way more engaged than they were in some of the other workshops that took place online as well. And they were just much more enthusiastic because they could see an immediate need for their knowledge, so they would gain the knowledge and then think, oh, you know, normally this might be useful in 5 years' time when I get a job doing whatever. Whereas this, they could see, well, I need this now because next week I'm going to apply it straight away. And so that immediateness, I think, made such a difference with their engagement and their enthusiasm for the learning. So hopefully that's kind of showcased how it might be used, and if it sort of helps anybody at all, then please feel free to contact me. This is my details obviously on screen. So if I can help with anybody, then please just give me a shout, and thank you very much for listening.
Oh, Jo, that was absolutely brilliant. The chat is congratulating you for your brilliant module feedback, the comments as well. So I've got some questions here that I've written down, but I'm just seeing if there's questions in the chat as well. But honestly, such a brilliant module. one of the questions was, how did you support students who couldn't attend the sessions for whatever reason?
That's a really good question. So normally the groups, to be honest, I was very, very lucky in the fact that they worked very well together anyway. So if somebody didn't attend a session, they generally caught up with their group at a different time in order to catch up, because they were so enthusiastic, they didn't want to get behind. So if they were sick one day, they would then catch up with their group another day. I did have a couple of groups that weren't quite as enthusiastic, shall we say. So they were a little bit problematic. So that involved me trying to get in contact with them and say, even if, other members of your group aren't turning up, you can still come, and I'll be supportive as much as I can. So I spent more time with some groups online than I perhaps did others, just to make sure that everybody was keeping up with everything.
Oh, that's brilliant. There's a couple of people, I think Tim and Rachel have put some ideas in the chat, because obviously it's quite intensive for yourself, isn't it? Creating the 10 hours of learning, but then you've got all your responses to the requests to give them their results for the following day, as it were, the following session. So, and one of the suggestions in the chat was to, I know that it's not always possible to do over 2 semesters to spread the content out. That was one of the suggestions, but all in all, everyone's so impressed with your organisation of your resources as well. It's so well organised. I had a question about, when you said at ARU you were dealing with science students, and then obviously you've got social science students now. How does the feedback and the performance of students compare? Is it the same, even though they're from different subject areas?
That's a really interesting question. I think so. I've sort of changed. So previously, when I ran a similar module at ARU, it had very much a forensic slant to it, and so they used to do certain elements of it, but it was using a lot of knowledge they gained previously. So I've changed a lot of it and put more teaching elements in to make sure the students have the knowledge before they then try and apply anything. So yeah, I mean, overall, in terms of like student performance and engagement, it's been exactly the same. So it'd be interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about whether it would make a difference as such. But yeah, in terms of group working and things like that, they're all very similar.
Oh, that's good. I mean, sometimes group work can be such a challenge, and the fact that they love it, they're so keen to attend your sessions. Did you see positive attendance across the group usually? Did you have high levels of attendance?
Yeah, so last year, to be honest, attendance for our online sessions was quite good across the board anyway. But for this one, they all pretty much turned up, and some of them were quite early in the morning. So I was surprised at how many people were there very early, not looking quite so bright, but willing to take part, which was really good.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, everyone's really impressed with the fact that you have to create all these resources. Now you've got them there at this big repository. Do you think that'll be easier when you run the module again? Will it be next semester?
Yeah, so we'll start this again in January. So I've got a lot of stuff already created. But every year that I've done this, there's always a group that asks for something bizarre that nobody has asked for before. So I then have to try and get creative, thinking of amusing names to put on. So I was trying to think of a name for a police dog last semester, which was, yeah.
I love the names. It's an extra level of engagement, isn't it, for them to use it. Tim in the chat has suggested I2 Analyst Notebook to link the intelligence forensics persons of interest from the investigation. Tim might be, oh no, Rachel said that they might be using it as well in January and February. So there might be some ideas of sharing practice going on there.
Definitely.
One of the things I was going to ask was, before we end, because I know we've got Kathy's presentation, is there anything that you think, I might do differently next time I run the module? Having reflected on the experience this year, I suppose you'll be on campus this next semester?
Yes, we're hoping to be on campus, touch wood. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to, some of the issues that we had being online. So the case file that they created was last year using OneNote because it links quite nicely with Blackboard, but again, it can be a little bit clunky and sometimes it wouldn't necessarily sync. So the students would be adding things, but other students couldn't see it and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping to try and use something a bit different. So if anybody's got any ideas about technology to make my life easier, then please do get in touch. I'd be very, very grateful.
David has put in the chat, there's an app called Scrivener, automatically creates names. Oh, that creates, so if you need more names. Oh, and Rachel's put a YouTube recording, forgive me, Tim did a session on the I2, so that might be for anyone that's watching that wants more information. That was a previous session. But thank you so much, Jo. It's absolutely brilliant. The amount of effort, I can see why the students love it, and you deserve that module score and the external examiner comments. So thank you for sharing it with us. I think you're going to be influencing a lot of people's practice with what you're doing. So I think it's brilliant.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me and having me on.
Oh, we're very lucky. We're very lucky indeed. Thank you, Jo.
So a little bit about problem-based learning, if I can get my slide to work. There we are.